Lovely to see you all.
Delighted to be here.
Hello. Hello. So obviously huge topic at the moment. It's possibly the worst time to be a female entrepreneur. And I'd like to start out by going round and asking each of you what you believe the biggest obstacle is at the moment. We'll start with Michelle, if that's all right.
Well, for me, I think the biggest obstacle actually is thinking about how women can deal with childcare. You've already mentioned it, but if we want to really enable women to build and change the future, then at the moment, in particular, where the pandemic has hit women hardest, then unless we find something that is a scalable solution for childcare for women at all ages of childhood, then unfortunately what we see is a depletion of women in both the workforce and in entrepreneurship as they make that decision to stay in a job perhaps that is paying the bills, but they don't have the financial freedom to take a step or a leap into entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, if we don't kind of actively look to support women and fund women, then of course they can only be what they can see, and they don't see other women like them doing the same thing, then obviously the stakes are much higher and the risk seems much more.
Yeah, Cherie, there was a lot of talk about women losing their jobs. So what Michelle was saying could be even more dire if they're stuck in a situation where they have no job to go to. What's your perspective on the biggest obstacle at the moment for women who are trying to start up?
Well, first of all, let me echo what Michelle has just said, because it is so true. And I think one of the things the pandemic has shown is the importance of the caring roles, childcare being one of them, but it goes all the way through the whole lifespan, both the importance and also how little we have valued them in the past. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that these are women's jobs. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking about women entrepreneurs and what they're missing at the moment, I think like everybody else, when we're faced with the crisis that the pandemic has impacted on the economy, if you look at how people are coping, one of the ways people are coping is by what, for a better word, you call the old boys network. And unfortunately, there aren't enough old girls networks to help give that sort of support, where you've got mentoring, you've got actual practical help with finance, capital giving, and just opportunities to do business. Women traditionally, and still up until now, have less chance of accessing these sort of networks. And in fact, research has shown that women who do get the chance to access these networks on average have 38% larger business than the vast majority of women who do not. And as you just said, in this pandemic, the health issues are often impacting quite a lot on men, but the economic impacts are definitely being felt more by women, and at this time more than ever, support networks, access to mentoring, access to finance is more important than ever.
And Elizabeth, finally, because this is a topic, the lack of network that really impacts black female entrepreneurs, right? I mean, what's the biggest obstacle for people in that field? Because it's really difficult across the board, but even more so for black female entrepreneurs.
Absolutely, and I want to kind of echo what everyone said, especially the point about informal networks and that old boys club. Black entrepreneurs start younger and often by necessity. So if you have that kind of burgeoning trend that this is what's happening, being able to tap into a network over Zoom and during COVID becomes a lot harder to kind of deal with. And I think, that's definitely one of the trends that I've seen in terms of what's been quite difficult at the moment.
Yeah, and it seems that the situation has got worse during the pandemic, right? Because you've got a lot of people who would have potentially been able to access some element of that funding before, but you've got a lot of people who have great ideas and really good business plans, and they simply don't have the family money to necessarily set it up. I mean, Elizabeth, how bad is the situation at the moment?
I would say it's very difficult. So the aspirations to start. So I've been writing about this for a couple of years at the moment, and aspiration to start a business for Black people in the UK is 35%. Compared to their white counterparts, which is 10%. But the conversions to actual starting the business and growing it remains quite low. And I think one of the challenges that we find is more often than not, Black entrepreneurs don't have access to the typical, I guess, family and friends rounds that you normally have, and a lot of them are more likely to bootstrap their business. But we know that, and I think that is one of the challenges that they often face. And in terms of how bad it is, I think that Black Lives Matter has shown in so many ways how dire the gap is. I think there was a stat that came out that Bird, the scooter company, the scooter startup, rental car startup, got more funding in their last round than all Black women received venture funding in the whole of 2019. So it's stats like that over the last couple of months that we've all kind of, we've had greater visibility on. And I think it speaks to the gap that exists between actually starting and being successful.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned the BLM movement, because it very much kick-started a conversation as to how bad things are and what to do to fix it. But now that the pandemic has become forefront in a lot of businesses' minds, do you think there's a danger that any kind of movement that had been done internally by VCs, by investors, by companies rethinking the way that they work will be undone?
I don't think the movement was as strong as we all felt it was. And I think that's what was quite damning about what's happened over the last couple of months. I think you can't talk about progress in the Black community without economics being at the start of that. So the kind of representation. So in terms of it being undone, I think there was progress, but not enough for it to feel as if it was falling at the streams now. So I think that's for me more the fact that how far we've got to go, as opposed to we've undone so many years of progress.
Yeah, a lot of entrepreneurs were trying to really push forward. Michelle, I mean, you were talking to me in a previous conversation about the role that entrepreneurs can play. How can more established entrepreneurs that have already raised some funding help people who are coming in behind them?
Yeah, I mean, look, the simple matter is, by the time you've already reached VC and institutional financing for your company, you're already streets ahead of anyone else who's at the kind of inception of building their company. Mm-hmm. So at that point that you have an audience, so to speak, with venture capitalists or institutional financing, it is incumbent on us to be able to say, what are you doing to diversify your pipeline? How are you thinking about diversifying your portfolio? What are the issues that you think are impacting you in reaching those other founders? Can I help you do it? And you will be surprised by the responses. There are some institutional investors who have not yet even thought about it. And I have to echo what Elizabeth said about, it wasn't as big as we might have thought. People setting up impact funds, which, this isn't impact, this is about business. There is good business sense to be had in backing the right founders. It's just about being able and putting the work in to find them. So we did a Series A at the start of the pandemic, and one of the first questions I was asking was, what are you doing to diversify your portfolio? All your portfolio founders look the same. Are you making efforts? And the good investors are doing things. They're scrapping their pipeline and they're starting again. And if you get that answer from an investor, it's gold, because now you know that that's the right type of investor, because it matters to you as a founder, not just to other founders. Because if they believe in changing the approach, then they must therefore believe in your ability to change the world with your product too. So it's actually benefiting everyone. It's a whole ecosystem.
And it's interesting because you're in a sector, again, you raised money during the crisis, which I remember you said you were a bit sort of reluctant to almost publicise because it would be seen as in bad taste, which is something that I don't think any male entrepreneur would have had a second thought about, which is really interesting. But you're in a sector which is social media. It's heavily dominated by men for a long, long time, and sort of being opposite VCs and investors who might not understand that it's a product for women or a service for women must be very difficult. How did you break through that barrier, aside from saying, why are you not more diverse and what can you do about that?
It's really hard because, of course, what we see in the cycle, particularly in social networking products, are investments in the same type of product over and over again. Mm-hmm. As the same type of institutional investor recognizes himself and the founder, their own issues in the product that is being built, and then they recognize the kind of value that was attributed to that, of course they're more drawn to invest in it. The problem is That's what's leading to the issues with social networking that we see today, because they're built on this kind of masculine economy. As we think about building something based on a feminine economy, so we're thinking about different types of values, collaboration, care, support. It's not the same as kind of how many likes and how many followers and that different type of capitalistic approach. It's a whole education piece. And the only thing I can say is I'm persistent, if nothing else. And there are people out there who will listen and understand and want to understand why we can still build something that is extremely valuable from a business perspective, that still does good and leaves a good legacy, rather than leaving us with a legacy that we have to resolve. We've all seen the documentaries, but also to understand that this takes time. This isn't something. All we're asking for is to change up what are considered to be the right goals and success measures, but also give us the same timescales that have been given to the young guys in their dorm room creating social networks based off, hottest girl on campus.
Yeah, that's a fair enough thing to say. I think I wanted to go back to the point of networks, which Cherie mentioned at the start, because I think this is a very crucial part, and it's something that I believe all of us having conversations before today have chatted about. How much do you think things have changed during the pandemic? Because we talk about the old boys club, we talk about unfair meetings that happen in private members clubs, unfair meetings that happen on the golf course where things are agreed, and people who don't necessarily have access won't ever be able to be in that same situation. Cherie, how do you feel things have changed during this pandemic, when we're stuck at home and perhaps seen as being on a more equal footing?
Well, I think that there are some very positive things to come out of this. We've certainly seen a fast tracking to a more digital economy by necessity. And this means, of course, online networks. And we've seen it in my own foundation. We were already working online, but since the pandemic, we've pivoted so much to ensure that we're providing what our women entrepreneurs need across the globe now. And we have had a lot of feedback from our women that we're working with as to these are exactly the sort of programs they want. And we've also seen our funders being much more interested in some of the programs like the online mentoring program that we are going to talk about later, because it enables people to do volunteering online from home. And this is very useful, particularly if at the time they're being on furlough. But I have to say, when we're looking about internet access and networking, we have to realize that there's a real global digital divide between the rich and the poor. Mm-hmm. And of course, women are overwhelmingly represented in the poor side, as of course are minority ethnic groups as well. Did you know, for example, that the GSMA, which is the global mobile industry board, shows that women are 20% less likely than men to be able to have access to the mobile internet. So, there's already a disadvantage when more and more we're talking about using technology. There's plenty of evidence around the world that if there's only one mobile device available, it's the men who get their hands on it, not the women. And we also need to ensure, therefore, that these global initiatives like Internet for All are urgently addressed by governments. Otherwise, we're going to find that divide completing. And I should say, interestingly, just a few years ago, Pope Francis actually said that a new human right is the right to be able to access the information and the opportunities that online can bring. And we're not achieving that for the poor, and we're not achieving that for women.
Yeah, absolutely spot on from the Pope there, which is good. Yeah. So we talk about the UK a lot, but the lack of successful female entrepreneurship is really a global issue. I mean, you talk to a massive amount of women across the world, don't you, Cherie, who are in various different situations in their lives. What do you think the consequences are if no action is taken, if no new funding is available for women? What could happen on a macro level here?
Well, let me first of all say that what the research has shown, and the World Economic Forum do a global gender gap report every year. Last year, it came out just in December. Their report showed that though progress is being made for equality for women, when you looked at women's progress in the economic sphere, it had actually gone back in the year 2019. And so it was now going to take an additional 55 years, in other words, 257 years before men and women had equal opportunities, equal economic opportunities. And that's a terrible waste. My foundation published some research with the BCG group, which showed that if actually women entrepreneurs did have equal access as men entrepreneurs to the same opportunities, a whopping $5 trillion could be added to global GDP. So why are we not taking this opportunity? Well, the truth is because we've lacked imagination. We've talked already about how funders in finance, people in the finance industry, they look for themselves when they give money, and they don't look for diversity. Another problem is that when you look at the data about how what the government uses to see, how do we support entrepreneurship, there's no gender information in that. So women's contribution as entrepreneurs and women's needs as entrepreneurs aren't even adequately reported, and therefore the policies that are developed are not, the information isn't there. And just recently, funny enough, I just read today a paper from Cambridge University Press which said that it actually has an impact also on the COVID response. So apparently the female perspective places a heavy emphasis on caution in relation to COVID. And because of the limited representation of women leaders across industries and in politics, it's likely that COVID regulations are going to be less cautious than if actually a woman's voice was heard. And so we're going to find that women employees in particular are going to have this representational double whammy, where the inequities that are already in the workplace are compounded rather than redressed by what's happening with the COVID outbreak. So we have to do more about rebuilding the global economy. It's absolutely vital that women's needs are met, that women's voices are heard, and if we're going to build a truly diverse global business ecosystem, then we have to have gender equality, and it's the greatest opportunity, but also the one we're failing at the moment.
It's quite depressing. I mean, you hear your stats, you hear your evidence. This isn't new information. We've known for many years now that diverse businesses do better, that female-led businesses are, on average, more efficient, more productive, have a better future, are more stable, are more financially reliable. And especially in the tech industry, that can be a gold dust, given the track record that we've seen over the past few years with some of the big investments and the bigger hitters that we've seen crumble into dust ahead of IPOs. So we've seen the evidence is here, we've seen the data is here. It seems from what you're saying, Cherie, there's a massive opportunity that isn't being exploited at the moment. And I think this kind of leads me on to something I believe, Elizabeth, you were talking about with me earlier, which is the opportunities that we have to influence the destinies of these entrepreneurs. We can't necessarily tell investors what they do. We can't necessarily, say what the market looks like as consumers, but we can make a vote with our feet, right? What can we as human beings do to support entrepreneurs who are trying to, break through these barriers that are already setting us on such an unequal footing? I think Elizabeth is having some technical difficulties.
Oh, can you hear me now? So sorry.
Yes. Sorry.
What I found quite interesting over the last couple of weeks and months in the positioning of helping Black founders and Black entrepreneurs is like flipping that on its head. We're not asking the species and people to help Black entrepreneurs. It's to empower them, because ultimately we dominate in various parts of culture, music, arts, and things like that. It's about leveling the playing field. So it's about the heart of the innovation that comes from looking outside your immediate scope. And I think that as consumers, we found with like Black Pound Day how powerful these movements can be, especially during these times. So I definitely do think that there is a huge opportunity as consumers to vote vote by their feet and vote by their, wallet. And if a business, and I think that is what has kind of been quite interesting during this time, that feeling of just everybody being more awake and being more informed about the power of supporting Black businesses, the power of supporting female entrepreneurs, not just by talking about doing it, but by actually, as a consumer, purchasing products, purchasing services and things like that. And I think what we found is I think Google did like a study, and the increase of people searching for black owned businesses and female specific services and businesses was like 300%. So I think the appetite is there. It's really about keeping momentum as we move out of this time.
Yeah. And I'd like to pass on to some questions because we've got quite a few from our audience who've been watching. I think this is one that maybe Michelle might be able to address quite well, which is what is one word of advice that you would give to a woman who is wanting to start her own company but is scared to make the leap?
I mean, the honest answer is it's a luxury to make the leap, but you have to do it, because otherwise you'll always be the person who felt like I could have done but I never did it. And how much better you'll feel if you do it and try and learn from it, rather than if you always kind of have that feeling of I wish I had but I didn't. The reality is, for many women, and it was for myself included, you can't just make that leap immediately, and it's a bit more strategic and it's a bit more planned, whether that means that you have to save really hard before you do it, whether it means that you have to genuinely think about plan A and plan B. I remember reading an article by another entrepreneur who was saying there is no plan B, because you just have to make plan A work. And unfortunately, when you've got kids or when you have another kind of ecosystem dependent on you, that's just not possible. So I always had a plan A and a plan B, but I never have ever regretted leaving and doing my own thing.
Mm-hmm. A question that I believe Cherie could work with quite well is this one over here, which says it's easier to make a good impression in person or meeting people in real life than over Zoom. So how can we grow and develop our networks during coronavirus and still be noticed? You've had, I believe, quite a few female entrepreneurs who've been able to do just that.
Absolutely, and in fact, it's been very interesting, because the history of my foundation is that I realized myself as a woman, when my husband was Prime Minister, and I have a business myself, as a legal business, obviously, and I was able to use technology to carry on that business and work full time while still doing the extra things that I had to do. And I thought technology can help me, it can help everybody, and that's what we've been trying to prove and have proved with the foundation ever since. So we have used technology, for example, to help build networks of women across the world, so that women can share their experiences during the pandemic. We've pivoted our entire website to a series of small videos from the different women we're working with, just talking a little bit about what they're doing, because hearing from others about what they're doing, how they're doing it, at the same time the materials that we've been providing to people are women in relation to, we've done a lot about business resilience. We discovered that a lot of women owners, nearly 50% of our women owners were saying, I'm not sure if I can continue. So we've developed online programs to help with resilience that enables you to have a program, a 90-day sort of pathway. Yeah. And that's been very, very important. And then our mentoring program, one of the things we've discovered is that women are really looking for some advice and help. And by using the internet and linking trained mentors, because we provide training, to women entrepreneurs, it can be, as one of the women put it, my invisible friend who walks with me on the journey. The idea of mentoring is not to tell women what to do, it's to help them work out the strategies that are going to work for them. And that is really, really important.
Yeah, and one of the big issues is that there's not often, if you don't have a network, you don't see a lot of role models out there anyway. It must be very difficult for women to even think. If you're in this situation, you're starting a new business, it's the middle of a pandemic, you don't really know anyone, you sort of go on LinkedIn, I guess, send a few messages. But I suppose what you're saying here is that it's better to try still to go through a more formal approach of going through a program rather than sort of randomly shooting off some emails.
No, absolutely. I think it's very important. We can all learn things, and if you've got a structured program, I think it really can help with defined goals rather than just sort of saying get on with it. Look, by the way, Michelle, what you say, I absolutely agree. 12 years ago, in my 50s, I just suddenly decided I was going to move from being a self-employed barrister and set up my own law firm. I mean, how crazy is that? And yet, actually, it worked. So it's not just, it's at any stage of your life you can take the decision to take control of your destiny. But to do that on your own is a hard and lonely thing, and to be able to have a support network, to be able to talk to other people in similar positions, and the fact is we are now so much more used to using this technology. Just this morning I was talking to a group of young women in Mozambique, girls who were doing mentoring of younger girls in schools and things. I mean, I was just sitting here, and yet we could still have a discussion like that. I mean, that would never even occurred to us probably a year ago. So there are plenty of ways in which we can keep in touch with each other and support each other. And I think that's really, really important, that like-minded people, that people care about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, actually building a world that isn't going to be the same as the world's been in the past, but is going to be better for everybody. I myself am now a grandmother, and when I started on my journey as working in this women's empowerment as a human rights lawyer, honestly, I thought it was going to be easy, and I'm not satisfied with the idea that my own granddaughters are going to be great grandmothers before women get equal opportunity. It's not going to happen because we're not going to allow it to happen. And I think all three of us on the panel, and hopefully many, many people listening to us, would agree. And the only way to change things, is to get together and make it happen.
Yeah. That's some excellent advice, Cherie. Thank you. And Elizabeth, I've got a question for you, which is basically about large brands and how people can perhaps take advantage of that momentum you were speaking about earlier. So how can large brands support female founders and entrepreneurs and internal incubators, accelerators? Should they be doing it directly, indirectly? What can people do if they're working within those businesses to kind of push them towards that situation where they can support, especially people from diverse backgrounds, a bit more?
Yeah, I think that one of the areas that I found recently that's been quite challenging is the recruitment process for these incubators and these accelerator programs, and sometimes these networks. So you don't know what you don't know, right? So I think that what will be of greater need to some certain communities is these businesses, these brands advertising in places that I guess they wouldn't necessarily expect people to essentially so I think it's going outside their scope of their typical startup ecosystem and going directly to the communities and creating these programs and kind of working with people who are already on the ground doing that. So you have all different organizations such as Hustle Crew, and you have all these kind of like communities. I think it's really important to tap into them in order to kind of get through to new founders and business ideas. I think that if you keep pulling from the same ecosystem of we're looking for diverse founders, you get people who have gone to Russell Group universities. You will get the same type of person who has and I think that is probably what I'm probably looking for from brands and businesses, is kind of going outside their scope of what a typical entrepreneur with an idea looks like.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, because it is often people trying to fulfill a quota, and in the end you've got people who are from remarkably similar economic backgrounds that just happen to be diverse. But that's a big mistake that I think a lot of businesses fall into, where they think they're doing the right thing, but in fact it's a lot more profound than that. That's a really good point, Elizabeth. I would like to finally get you all to do some future gazing. I know, Cherie, you've said we're going to change things. You've kind of done the battle cry of this is going to happen before your grandkids are your age, which I I really hope that is the case. But I would like to ask you for your top recommendations for a little bit earlier on in time for 2021. We've got a lot of business leaders, a lot of consultants and VCs who are listening in, watching today. So could you, in a sentence, each of you, sum up your what you hope is going to happen in 2021 to change the dynamic of where we are right now? Let's start with Michelle.
Please scrap the pipelines. Please don't always look for yourself in the founding team or your problems in the problems being solved, because I think that's the biggest killer to many kind of underrepresented founders that we see today. So scrap the pipeline and start again.
That's good advice. How about you, Cherie?
Well, I think that, we have to seize this opportunity. There's been some talk about, are things going to get worse for women? Are we going back to the 1950s because of the double burden that we've heard about caring as well as carrying on with careers? I absolutely say we cannot let that happen. And I don't believe it will happen, because I think that determined women who know what they can contribute are not going to be pushed back from making progress in this. And we have to ensure that we this is using technology to make things better. This is a real opportunity, and we've talked about it a lot. And what we've suddenly seen in these last 6 months is how technology really can make things change, and change very quickly. And building on that, using technology to reach out to underrepresented groups, to provide the training, the support, the mentoring, the networks that they need. This can happen. We can make it happen. So let's do it.
That's really good. And finally, Elizabeth.
I was just going to echo what Michelle said around stop seeing yourself in the problems. I think that's a barrier, and start seeing the opportunity to speak to communities and to diverse groups of people, and the kind of like capital, the actual benefit, the commercial benefits of just not looking at yourself, looking at the problem and looking at yourself within it. Yeah,
because there's a great opportunity. We've got loads of missed revenue, missed really great opportunities for good companies that could become the next tech unicorns. And it's just silly, doesn't it? It's just what it boils down to. It's a commercial decision to not take advantage of that.
It's not about impact.
Someone's noise. That's fine.
It's not impact funds. It's actually good business commercial sense. And that's where I think it sometimes gets lost. People think about investing as a impact, and that's not what it is. It's actually good business.
No.
That's really good.
Brilliant. But never underestimate the ability of a non-diverse group to do something silly.
Yes, it's always a shame to me to see that the extraordinary things that are happening are always the bad things. It's not ideal. But yeah, let's hope for a better future for 2021 at least. Thank you all so much for joining me for this panel. You've been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.